All right. Hello, everybody. This is my first podcast, and I have today with me Emily Jeffries. She's a theology teacher and a speaker with a bachelor's degree in drama and religious studies from the University of Virginia and a master's degree in sacred theology from the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. Emily does also a little bit of improv comedy. She enjoys evading cardiovascular activities, and she sings all of Les Mis from memory. She currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with her husband and baby daughters, and she also co-founded a society for Catholic writers with two other Catholic writers called Fable Hive. And if anyone is interested in being involved with that, I'll leave a link in the description. But yeah, welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm excited.
So let's start off a, a little bit just talking about your background and how you initially got into writing.
Well, as you read from my little bio, I had this dual interest in theology and drama, but I did so much musical theater and singing in high school and college that I thought I was going to be an actor. I thought I was going to pursue being a musical theater, primarily actor. So I like to say that the thread between the two is a love of storytelling. Like I loved The Greatest Story Ever Told, Salvation History, but I also I loved wonderful characters and geeking out about tales. Um, I tried for a little bit to audition, in the real world after college and found that it was a little bit of a hostile environment to Christians. So I thought, well, you know what? I liked teaching. I loved teaching theater. I did a lot of like kids camps and that sort of thing. I directed a show for high schoolers. Why don't I go back and get a degree in theology and then I can teach theology and then for sure I will be in a environment that is conducive to being a Christian. So I did that. I taught for a couple of years and I taught high school and middle school. And because of my health, I had to quit working full time. But I did just like develop such a love of middle schoolers in particular. It's such a neat age. They were asking the toughest questions more so than the high schoolers. The high schoolers like that they want to be cool and they don't want to ask, they don't want to actually look like they're interested. They just want to know how to get a good grade. And the seventh graders are just like pondering for the first time, like, does my dog go to heaven? That was always a huge debate in my seventh grade class. So I really loved that age. And I started to learn what they were reading or what was available to them to read in their spare time and was a little bit horrified. And I had this manuscript sort of, tucked away in a drawer somewhere. So when I had to quit and work on my health, I decided I was going to pursue finishing and publishing that novel and hopefully putting something out that was an alternative to what my kids and kids like them, my students and students like them were reading. So that was a while ago, but that's how I got started. And I haven't stopped, even though I'm a slow writer. I write, pretty consistently, and I just, I adore it for the flexibility in my life. I can put it down and have a baby and pick it up again. But also, I love character and I love trying to stay true to my faith in the fiction. So it just like ties up all of my passions in a neat little bow.
Yeah, so I didn't mention this in the intro, but the book we're discussing is Fyrian's Fire, which is by Emily here. If anyone's interested to getting their own copy. But yeah, I mean, we discussed this a little bit beforehand, but um, after I got to like, I think it was like chapter three, and I read through chapter three, I ended up almost finishing the book at like in one sitting, in a single sitting, you can say. So it's very well done. What what in
Thank you. That made
particular
me so
though
happy to
made
hear.
you drive towards yeah, what in particular made you want to do more of like fantasy writing instead of, you can say, like almost like uh apologist like apologies
Oh,
work for
yeah.
like
Well,
just
huh.
younger age? Yeah.
Yeah, writing. I mean, yeah, just I had the experience of writing a dissertation or a thesis for my master's in theology, and just hated every minute of it, to be honest with you. I like to teach a lot, and teaching in a more apologetic setting, I like to do a lot. That's probably the performer in me. But nonfiction, I I is not. I guess I'm just not very good at it. I can write essays, so it has like a little bit more of a personal element, but like a strictly theological work, I'm not qualified either. I mean, I went to school with a bunch of Dominicans. I was definitely the stupidest one in my class. I was just like barely understanding what anybody was saying. So I also have had that humbling experience and know that there are better theologians out there who can write that sort of stuff. And for me to read, I love to read it. I love to read um, the Summa. I mean, I like to read the driest of the dry theologically, but writing it is not my strength. But fantasy, to answer your question about
So
fantasy versus some other kind of fiction, sorry, that's just what I love most reading growing up. I mean, Redwall. I don't know if you ever read the Redwall books by Brian Jakes. That's a bunch of talking animals battling in sort of a medieval world. Um, Dealing with dragons. Obviously loved Harry Potter when it came out. I was older then. Um, and some fiction I enjoyed, like Anne of Green Gables and Little Women. That was more contemporary, but probably my favorites are, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. So that's just what I loved to read growing up.
oh, that's so cool. I mean, who are what's did you? I'm assuming. I mean, I feel like it's all with all Catholics. Did you have any influence from Tolkien or C.S. Lewis as well?
Well, I try to keep this sort of on the down low, but I'm more of a C.S. Lewis fan than I am a Tolkien fan. And it's not that I'm not a Tolkien fan, but my influence, I mean, I just think C.S. Lewis is the most um I don't know, he's the best writer of our last century. You can't top him. The way that he can use metaphor so precisely, and also never writes above anyone's head. Like, he's so pithy and he's so straightforward, but it's so mind blowing. Some of the stuff that he has in Mere Christianity. It's very hard to read Mere Christianity and not be totally transformed by it, but it's really simply written. Anyway, so C.S. Lewis is my favorite. Um, and I read The Hobbit as a kid, did not read The Lord of the Rings until I was an adult. So now the secret is out.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, I I'm more Tolkien. I read first before C.S. Lewis,
okay.
but Tolkien also I got to know his work first from the films actually. So when the
Oh,
movies started coming out back in what is like 2001 and stuff, um, and then later after those films, I read The Hobbit, and then after reading The Hobbit, I read the three books. And C.S. Lewis wasn't on my radar till recently, honestly. So I read between Until We Have Faces, and
yeah.
that's the one I read recently. But yeah, I mean, something like Until We Have Faces was there's so much depth to that story, but at the same time, it was so simply written where you didn't have to almost do research as you're reading the book. There was something about it that like you said, it was
Yes.
masterfully done, that it was simple but there was so much depth to it at the same time.
I guess that's what makes him so rereadable. It's like I'm always excited to pick it up again because there's going to be so much that I missed the first time, the second time. And I'm in a different phase of life and something else will hit me. You can just always come back to the same, even though he's written so much, and maybe you never can get back to the same book. You can always come back to it and read it again and again.
Yeah. So let's go into your book a little bit. Um, what? So you mentioned a little bit about working with students, with kids, and wanting to write fantasy for them. But where did the content of this kind of like what influenced the content of the book specifically? Like, where did the characters come from? The
Oh,
you know, the
yeah.
talking animals and things like that. Like, where did it come
Talking animals. You know what's funny about the talking animals is that when I was pitching this book to agents, some agents, literary agents, will have in their like information, their wish lists and kind of things that they're looking for. They will have no talking animals. Like, do not approach me if you have talking animals in your book. So it's one of those things where you either love it or you hate it. And I was like stunned. I was like, how can you not love? Because as a kid, that's like the wind in the willows. I mean, I just adore it. So probably the talking animals just were a necessity for me because I loved books with, personified animals, animal characters. Combining the world of animal characters and human characters was a little tricky and probably influenced by Narnia. Um, and Tess, the main character, she is 16, I believe, at the beginning of this book. So I'm drafting the second book and she's older, so I have to keep track of this. But and she was inspired a little bit by a struggle that I saw in myself and also in my contemporaries, which was this right when you come out of college or when you're that young age of like high school and college, especially in our culture today, there seems to be this desire to like be seen and adored and admired. I think it has to do or is closely connected now to social media and having that immediate gratification of likes and comments and shares and but it's true. I mean, I didn't have that when I was, that young, and it's true really for a lot of young people where I want to kind of be known and I want to be adored and not having a sense of like maybe that's earned or maybe I don't deserve it. Or maybe I haven't really like discovered who I am yet. Just kind of it's a maturity thing. But that I was really interested in that particular struggle. And that's why Tess has this kind of Mary Lennox arc of in the beginning of the book, she's a little bratty. She has some like humbling to do. And then, not to give too much away, but sort of her arc throughout the story is that she is humbled. She makes this really big mistake. She has to accept that she's flawed. And then she does something that really does earn her maybe some respect, some adoration. But the nature of the role that she fills is that she has to stay hidden. And she can't accept that acclaim. And she, does not end up her life doesn't end up the way that she pictured it would, and that she would be sort of adored because she is a dancer. So she is a performer and she like has tasted, she's a very talented dancer. She's tasted what it's like to be on a stage and to be acclaimed. So anyway, that is the influence for the main character Tess and kind of how she emerged.
Nice. Yeah, I like that this book definitely follows very much like traditional storytelling in that Tess is definitely like a very strong feminine character, but it's not in the way where um that modern storytelling is trying to do that. So she's very heroic and powerful, but in keeping with being feminine, opposed to
Right.
a lot of it, like you said, is staying hidden, um, and to a certain extent, the use of not to reveal too much, but there's an aspect of like magic that's involved, and those are all traditionally kind of like more feminine traits. And in modern stories, you really have like women overpowering like someone that clearly weighs like 200 pounds more than them or what have you. So um what made you kind of stick with the traditional tropes and archetypes instead of the more modern ones?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. And this was something that I specifically wanted to kind of provide a foil to, was the assassin women main characters, which are bountiful in YA fantasy right now. And I do think that a character leaning on combat abilities, which, you know, some women can do great combat and some can't, but sort of it becoming the character's identity and what is making that character a quote strong character is just to not understand the strength and beauty of what it is to be feminine and just try to lean on what you think maybe is so appealing about the masculine and borrow from it. Excuse me. Um, I wanted to explore what a world would look like that values femininity and cherishes it, and also is a place that allows for women to be individuals and have different dispositions and have different passions and are free to like fill those roles. Um, so no, Tess is not an assassin and she doesn't have nunchucks, and her personality is beyond kind of her like physical ability to kick some butt. I had one more thing I was going to mention about that, about the women. Oh, my publisher initially on Amazon, in some of the like keywords under Fyrian's Fire, had strong female lead, I think, strong female character. And they did that probably because it, you know, is a common search, and you know they were just trying to get like a good number of searches and get it positioned well on Amazon. But I sent an email and I was like, please take that down because that's not at all where I am coming from. And I we need to just embrace that Tess is a woman who is womanly and is more traditionally is more suited to the more traditionally minded. And you know, especially when you're like pitching your book or advertising your book, you want to just be as straightforward as you can be about like what's in here, because the worst comments that you can get, the worst reviews you can get, are from people who are expecting something different. And people who like are Googling strong female lead would, I think, be disappointed or at least like confused that, again, like you say, she's not an assassin. She is an aristocratic woman.
I mean, there were points in that too where because of that, you really felt that there's a sense of urgency of what she had to do, like because I mean, you had a lot of strong, you can say like villains in there that were after her, but it made it feel, I don't want to use the term realistic, but there was like a real urgency to make sure that she was able to achieve her goals. And it wasn't, you didn't have that in the back of your mind, like, oh, she can just, use his weight against him, or like, trip him up with her combat abilities or whatever. It was like, Tess uniquely overcame those obstacles in like the way Tess would. Like, so it gave her like a
Hmm.
more of a depth to what she was as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about
But
that. I also, I was thinking about like when I was coming along, I feel like, well, this is a little bit after when I was coming along, but I feel like the 2000s, early 2000s was kind of this golden age for this genre. That's when you had like Ella Enchanted, Princess Academy, that sort of thing. And um, those female leads, I think, were also considered strong female leads because they were sassy. So 10, 20, or no, not 10, but 20, 30 years ago, that was the thing, was like um, this female lead like talks back and is like disobedient. It's like the Ariel the mermaid. Like that was she was half naked, but she was disobedient, so she was super edgy. So there's always, if you're trying to like reinvent what it is to be a woman, it's like it gets old fast, and then you have to like find something new for it to be, and then you just end up with with assassins. But sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. But I
Yeah,
appreciate
you
that the
no,
pacing
it's
was good.
yeah, no, it's also um I mean, you have an opportunity to work on the characters more in depth when you do it the way you did it, because in a sense, if you try to, let's say, have uh feminine characters with more masculine traits, or even masculine characters with more feminine traits, you almost have to manipulate the world around them in order for it to make sense. So then
Hmm.
you're almost trying to bend the whole world to make their like traits fit, instead of working on that character depth and stuff like that. So one example I like to
Hmm.
use is someone like Saint Joan of Arc. Like Saint Joan of Arc was a warrior to a certain extent, but she never took the glory upon herself, right? Her goal was to have the King of France basically come back. And so like her whole goal was to coordinate the king, like bring back the masculine lead. And her glory at the end of it was that she lost her life. Like she didn't get the
Hmm.
trophies or the medals or anything. She ended up losing her life for it. So
Hmm.
though you have certain characters like Saint Joan of Arc, it's it doesn't always, I can say, to a certain extent, end well. But she did it for the I don't want to say like the greater good, because that sounds weird, but just like the necessity of what France needed at the time.
Yeah, and it was a glorious end, if you believe in the spiritual world, if you believe in the immortality of the soul.
Yeah, exactly. And then and then excuse me. And then you had the interesting thing about the queen of was it called Gladifort? Was that the
Glademont. Hmm.
Glandamont? Um, so you had a feminine character like a queen being the ruler of the all land. You didn't necessarily have like a kingship in that one, right?
That's right. It's called a Dion, the Dion of Glademont, and that just means that a queen is always, yeah, the regent, and the queen is not of the royal lineage. The king is. So the king and queen have a child, hopefully a prince, and the prince chooses a bride among the people of Glademont. So she's called this like commoner queen. And, they're just like, Glademont has this kind of tradition of like um, humbling, I guess, where, it's the queen who rules us, and we believe that there's something special about that. And the queen is always of the people. So she feels like we just like have this special love for her as our mother, and she's not distant from us. Um, and that was just because I thought it would be fun and interesting, and because the chenille, which is the object that you see around Tessa's hair on the cover, is particularly tied to a feminine spirit and can't be used by a man, which is not like a anti-man thing. It was just a way of kind of
No,
highlighting
yeah,
and exploring the feminine.
no, yeah. I mean, the thing about the masculine and feminine is they both have their strengths and weaknesses, you can say, but
Right.
it's not in a way where they use their strengths against each other. It's that they complement each other, right? It's like the
Right.
union of the two. The point is that one one uses their strength to protect the other, while one, you can say, uses their wit. Like wisdom is usually a feminine trait to
Right.
guide guide the strength of the masculine in the right direction.
Mm.
um, and it's not always just like a power structure where someone is trying to dominate somebody else and your goal is to over dominate them or something like that.
Yeah, or a
it's,
zero sum
it's
game where if you have strengths, that's like a threat to me and my strengths. We can't both have strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Now, next question I kind of want to move on to, so we've been kind of like talking particularly about character archetypes and stuff, is you had a series of animals. So the most kind of like prominent ones through these were the birds. So you had them split into like you could say like the raptors, like the more like ferocious, like carnivorous birds, so like the hawks, eagles, owls, and stuff like that. And then you had basically all the other ones. Um, and one of the leading antagonists is what's it called? A bird as well. But
Yes,
what
Piter.
was the idea of it mostly became? Yeah, what was the idea of mostly it being kind of like? What was the idea between using birds as like I would say is like the majority of the animal characters in this?
You're probably right. There are a lot of birds. And I wish I could say, Patrick, that there's a really deep reason for that, but I just really love birds. I'm a huge bird nerd. And so I just couldn't help myself. But there is the woods in the Hinge Forest, there's this council of the nest that happens pretty early on in the story that's presided over by owls. They're the wise. And that is a lot of birds. It's like an upside down nest that's, the size of like, I don't know, Monticello or something. And they, the birds have been, the wild birds of the forest have been given this choice to either join up with Piter the crow, the blind crow, or not defend themselves as the wild animals of the forest, Hinge foresters. And yeah, so they kind of get split down the middle, and it is mostly like vultures and crows and those kinds of birds that you might associate with the dark side that join up with Piter. And sort of the smaller woodland birds stay true to the Hinge forest. A towhee and red owl and bluebirds and those sorts of creatures. But you tell me, is there some deeper symbolism to all the birds?
I mean, I was there is, but I mean, one thing that I found interesting to before I go into that is I thought it was surprising that you had eagles up with the antagonist as well. Usually, eagles are viewed as like an honorable bird or a bird that's on the good side. So, what was there a specific idea of why you had eagles on the you can say the bad side, the dark side too, or was it just because also they had were like a raptor type of bird?
That is true. That was not very patriotic of me. But I was thinking basically the raptors. Yeah, the more carnivorous. Although the owls, you just can't make. So I guess one of the owls was not so great. All the characters aren't all black and white, but I think I was kind of making a little bit of a divide there between the carnivorous birds and the more like woodland birds. But that was really it.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, birds are usually associated with like you can say principalities or virtues or kind of the heavenly stuff. That's why you have things like angels with wings,
Wings.
and birds are one of the first creatures you can say that God created. So he created the birds of the air and then the fish in the
Yes.
sea. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, bird so in a sense you almost had like a battle of principalities in your story, right? You had almost like um something like patience or whatever is not necessarily a vicious type of virtue. I mean, it's patience, it's a little passive, but and passions are more, you would say, like rooted in something like claws or the carnivorous. And so like yeah, you
Right.
had like this aspect of a battle between principalities. Basically, it's like the battle of heaven and hell to some
Oh,
extent.
cool. Well, that was, subconscious. I
Yeah.
am
And then
it
the
is it's
second
probably the most embarrassing thing about me is how much of a bird nerd I am. I just turned into a grandmother immediately and, got myself a bird feeder as soon as I could, and I just love identifying birds and the towhee in particular, Profigliano, who becomes the companion of Tessa's little brother. Tohis have such an attitude, and it's so cute. And so I hope I captured a little bit of that. I just love to observe them and think of what they might be saying.
Yeah. No, I mean all the characters are definitely very have their own unique personalities and characteristics, and you kind of like their their goals are all in a way united, but they also have like their individual ones to a certain extent. And so like it was nice to see the growth of all of them and them being able to achieve towards the end. I don't want to necessarily spoil the ending, but
Right,
they were able to get together and get what needed to be done.
right. Well,
And
good.
then
Thanks.
the other question the other question I had is the dogs. So the dogs were pretty big in it as well. So they were mostly um, so initially when they first introduced the animals, the dogs were the ones that were mostly the users of the various magics. And so and they were also these kind of like a mixture between like servants but guards at the same time,
Right.
which I found pretty interesting as well. So, what was kind of a thought process of that a little bit between of like using dogs for being like the wielders of magic?
Okay, so the very first animal character you get introduced to, his name is Colonel Regency Wallace, Reggie for short, and he is the governor for Tessa's family. And he is really, in essence, a miniature schnauzer. So in this society, there's all these terriers who, if you've ever encountered a terrier, they really do think they're the boss of everybody. And so I was leaning into that personality. And they're, sort of half, yeah, bodyguards, half babysitters, but they would be so indignant if you ever called them that. And they happen to be also bond fellows. And in this world of Glademont, there's such thing as a bond fellowship, which is kind of essentially a sacrament, or that's how I was picturing it, in which an animal sort of decides to devote him or herself to a human being, and the that does empower the animal with use of a certain kind of magic. But Glademont had been such a peaceful place for so long that sort of fell away as like that's just myth, or that's not really a reality, but it's something that we like to say they can use magic. So that's kind of revived in this book because obviously that piece is about to end. Um, Colonel Wallace is actually inspired. He's the only character in the book that's inspired by a real life creature, and that is a dog that I grew up with, whose name was Wally. So that's the reason for the terriers being the governors. But then their foil is the hounds that the enemy kingdom joins up with, and the hounds are bad guy dogs in Fyrian's fire, and they can wield sort of the evil magic um, that combats the Bondfellows magic.
Nice. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. So I definitely recommend that everyone that listens to this to check out this book. Definitely worth the read. Very fun. But in terms of writing in itself, um, if anyone's is particularly a Catholic or a Christian and is enjoys the fantasy side of stuff, kind of like, do you have any kind of like I guess tips or advice for anyone that wants to get into writing, specifically fantasy within like a faith background?
Oh, well, we were talking before we started recording about reading the right books. I do think that people should be discerning about what fantasy they're picking up and like filling their head with. And just because it's popular or a bestseller doesn't mean it should be one that you pick up. I do have a tab on my website of, I think the tab is called Bookshelf, and it's a little just kind of a recommended reads. So that could be a good place to start for reading fantasy. Um, I mean, there are a lot of writing books out there, and I actually have some I guess I have a whole like recommended reads on that tab. Um, but I don't know, as far as being a Catholic and writing fantasy, I think it does free you up because you don't come up from a fundamentalist background to embrace the mysterious. And we just have this beautiful faith that embraces mystery and is not uncomfortable with it. And we talk a lot about the spiritual life and how there's like a spiritual battle happening at the same time as us living and existing in this material world. And it's not just metaphorical that we call ourselves church militant. And I think one of the beautiful things about writing fantasy is that it can be this reminder that like your spiritual life is also an adventure. Like maybe you're not, Bilbo Baggins and a wizard is coming to ask you to go find this dragon, but something like that is pretty much happening spiritually. And if you think of your spiritual life and your sort of progress toward holiness as an adventure, it helps you have like a it helps you to have a more joyful disposition, or at least a more hopeful disposition about the spiritual life. That like when you falter, it's just like, running into those trolls on your way to see Smaug. Like if you think of it in that way, I think it gives you a lot more stamina and to keep walking in the way of Christ. And personally, I think it'd be great if more stories were out there that were coming from that point of view. Of course, there's also stuff like we've been talking in Fable Hive lately about Flannery O'Connor, who has a different approach to fiction, which is like to really show you we've become so complacent in our sort of living in the muck that she decided to like exaggerate it so that you would kind of shock you into realizing like, oh yeah, this is what I look like without the grace of God. So there are different approaches, obviously, but that's the one that I favor. The more adventure with hope is what I try to do.
Yeah, and sometimes with fantasy, it's easier to tell like the fullness of the truth than it is just trying to explain it necessarily scientifically, right? So, like you said,
Yeah.
um, we all come across trolls or dragons that's in some aspect of our lives. It doesn't necessarily look like a giant lizard, but it can take different forms, I guess you can say. And also, since you
Yeah.
touched on it, if you can talk a little bit about what Fable Hive is, and if and how people can get involved if they want to.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so Adelaide Thorne and Michaela Eaton are the other co-founders of Fable Hive. And we had all been existing on Instagram in the sort of Christian bookstagram world circles, which is a lovely place to be. And there's such wonderful people who are in that circle. But we sort of had been talking about how we do have to like play down our Catholic identity in those circles. And, it's really weird, but there can be some Protestants who write fantasy who are still pretty anti-Catholic. And so eh, we were like, well, there've got to be other people like us. So we decided to start a society for Catholic authors of speculative fiction for young readers. I know that's like a lot of specificity, but basically, Tolkien and Lewis lovers and people who are, but all, and Lewis wrote sci-fi. So anything that falls under the speculative fiction umbrella and writing for middle grade readers or young adult readers. We have a community on Discord where we just chat a lot. We ask for prayers. We You've been on with us to discuss some theological ideas. I've gone on the Discord just to ask for help with drafting the sequel to Fyrian's Fire. And yeah, we just hope that can be there to, if you need beta readers, if you need, someone to help you make a decision. Somebody came on and said, should I split this book up in two or should I pare it down? And then we also just launched our Instagram account, at the Fable Hive is our handle, where we are trying to put out some content that's just inspiring for the members of the community, myths and legends that we come across, really cool stories of the saints, that, kind of sound like myth and legend, and also just some spiritual, not spiritual direction, but spiritual inspiration. And we're doing a neat reflection for Lent right now, where we're taking a deep dive into Psalm 51 together. So we're doing it in our free time, and we're hoping to kind of be a vehicle for like authors to find each other. And so far it's been really great.
Is there any prerequisites or anything that anyone needs to join, or
Um,
can anyone be involved?
Good question. There really aren't any prereqs on the Discord. I think you're asked, like, how did you hear about us? Are you Catholic? Do you have a book out yet? And there's no right answer to any of those. Just as long as you like are aware that we're Catholics, and we're mostly gearing our stuff toward Catholics. But if that's, we just had someone share our post today who said, I'm not Catholic, but I've been finding these posts really inspiring lately. She's just an author of fantasy. So yeah, no, there's nobody at the gate that's not allowing anyone in right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important as Catholics that we definitely step up our game in storytelling. I know in terms of the film world that there's this always Christian films in general have always been kind of like laughed at because the message was always put on top of the story itself. But
Absolutely.
we have so many cool stories under our belts that we could use as inspiration from saints. I mean, even like we discussed earlier, I connected to certain aspects of Saint Joan of Arc to stuff happening in your book and we have dragons and stuff in our biblical stories too. So I mean, there's definitely something to it, and we definitely should not be afraid to tell those type of stories.
Amen.
Cool. And then, so lastly, where are some places that people can get your purchase their book if they want to check it out?
Anywhere that you get any other books. Amazon is totally fine. There's an ebook, Target, just anywhere. I don't offer it specifically through my website right now. So whatever is most convenient.
Perfect. Well, thanks for hanging out with me and chatting about your book and stories in general, Emily. Looking forward to what else you'll publish in the future.
I appreciate that. Prayers that I can get this draft rolling and finished, and we can get that sequel out within the year.
Right. Perfect. Well, everyone definitely check out the Fable Hive if you're interested in writing stories and you're in a Catholic background. And go check out her book, Fyrian's Fire. And it sounds like there's going to be more. So definitely keep in touch. All right. Well, thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed the content here on my channel, please like and subscribe. And if you would like to learn more, I have a blog on my website where you can learn more about symbolism, as well as short form videos and articles on my Instagram page. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune into the next one.